All right, welcome back. So next up, we are continuing to talk about utilities. This is one of the most useful. There are actually two we're looking at that have to do with spacing. They're really useful. They come up a lot. Not the most glamorous thing ever, spacing utilities, but I promise they're used all the time. And so don't skip this just because it's not a navbar or forms or something more exciting. So what am I talking about? Well, if we go to the documentation, you go to utilities, scroll down to spacing. This is what we're talking about, margin and padding. So let me start by saying if you're not familiar with those, definitely do some research or watch a quick YouTube video, look at the docs on MDN to understand what they are. They both have to do with spacing. Padding is the spacing between the border of an element and the content. So like on this button, it's that space on the inside. And then margin is the space on the outside surrounding it between the border of that element and other elements. So we can manipulate them using Bootstrap classes. So instead of having to go into the CSS on our own and write our own styles that say padding X amount of pixels or margin X amount of pixels on the top or the bottom, we can do it really quickly using these classes. Now the syntax looks a little bit complicated at first when you look at this here. Property sides dash breakpoint dash size. Or the simpler version, property sides dash size. So let's just walk through what I'm talking about here. Property is the easiest part. If we want to change margin, we're going to add a class that starts with M. So something like M-5 or M top-5, or it's technically T. And if we're trying to change padding, we're going to work with P. So that's the first part, property, M or P. Now the next component is sides. So if we're doing padding, it's going to be P and then the sides. So that refers to, are we adding padding to the top, only the bottom, only the left, only the right, or X, which is for the X axis, left and right at the same time, or Y for top and bottom at the same time. Or if you leave it blank and you just say P, it adds padding to all four sides, or margin if you do M. And then we have to specify the size. So how much are we adding? And this is the hardest part for me to explain. Basically, if you look at the docs, there are 6 levels. Margin, let's say we're working with margin. Margin 0 eliminates all margin. Margin 1 is going to set the margin to be 0.25 REMs. Now, if you're not familiar with REMs, it stands for root M's. Actually, it's pronounced M, not EM. So I should say RMs. So there is a spacer value that you can change once we get into working with the Sass variables. We're not doing that now. So when we set something to be margin 1, it is going to be set to 0.25 rems. When we set it to margin 2, it's going to be 0.5 rems. When we set it to margin 5, it's 3 rems. And as we go through, I'll point it out in the inspector what that looks like. So really quickly, these are just different numbers that allow you to either decrease or increase the margin. And it all has to do with rems, which are based off of the root element, the font size of the HTML root. So if you change that document font size, the padding will grow or shrink along with that. So let me show you an example. I have a brand new document again called spacing. It's the title, it's empty. I'm going to start by making a bunch of H1s really quick. I'm going to give each one a background info, and I'm going to make them all inline block so that we can just see them together like that. And then I'm going to say this one is padding of 0. Let's work with padding first. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate this a bunch of times. Okay, and to make this easier, I'll do it like this. So I'm going to just give them each a different value to display very quickly. So we have this here right now, 6 H1s. They all look the same. Now what I'm going to do is change the padding on some of them. So I'm going to give them a class that will do that. So this first one, I'll give it P0. That sets padding to 0 all the way around. It doesn't look very different at all. But now this second one, I'm going to give it padding 1. And you can see it grew a little bit. It's kind of hard to see. It's not huge. But as we continue on to some of these other ones, like P2, we get more padding all the way around. This is on all sides, remember. So next one is P3, padding on all sides, and you can see where this is going. And that's all 5 of them, or 6 levels. So padding 5, if we inspect, sets that to be 3 rems. And this padding, because it's using rems, unfortunately I don't have time to teach all of this, but it's basically a relative unit. So if we go to the HTML element and I change the font size of the entire document, it's usually the default is 16. If I change it to 10 pixels, notice all the padding shrinks. Same thing if I go to, I don't know, 50. All that padding grows with it. So I'll leave it at the default, which is 16. Now if we go back to the docs, we've been adding padding all the way around on all 4 sides, but we can also add padding to only the top or the bottom, the left, the right, or the left and right at the same time, top and bottom at the same time. So I'll quickly illustrate that and won't make you watch me do all of them. But let's do buttons this time, and let's do a large button, so BTN-LG, and let's do BTN warning. And we'll do padding top 5. Let's just do 5 for all of them so you can see the most significant difference. Okay, so of course right now it has no padding top, but if I give it padding top of 5, you can see we get a lot of padding at the top. And if we duplicate that and this time do padding bottom 5, we only get padding on the bottom. And the same for the left and the right, of course. Now if we only wanted top and bottom padding, not left and right, we can do PY. And you can see we get it top and bottom. And on the other side of things, we can do PL for the left side, and then PR for the right side. And I know this is getting kind of dull. So finally, our last one is PX5, which is left and right together. And you can see we get padding on the left and the right. All right, so that's the padding utility. And moving on to the margin utility, it's very similar. We just changed that P to an M, and we're working with margin. So here I've made, let's do, instead of info, let's do success. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate this a couple times. And I'm going to start by doing the same thing, just all around margin. So M1 is margin 1 all the way around, which is, if we look at it again, it's kind of hard to tell here, but you can see this one has 0 margin. This one has just a little bit of margin right there. And if we click on it, it's 0.25 REMs to be exact. And if I remove it, you can see it is making a difference. It's just not huge. All right, next we've got margin 2, margin 3. Let's finish that up. Save. Okay, so you can see, margin 3 has quite a bit more margin, especially if we highlight it, you can see it now. And then we got margin 4 and 5. And I'm not going to go through all the other things with left and right, top and bottom. They all are there, the same as padding. If you want to add margin only to the bottom, you can do MB5 or MB, whatever number you want. Same thing for left and right, top and bottom, and X and Y. All right, so that's margin there. Now the thing I do want to get to that is more powerful is that we can selectively apply these at different breakpoints. So I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to make a couple of spans, and I'm going to give them class BG warning. And I'm actually going to give some style up top. I want to make a grid of like 8 or 9 boxes. And right now, they're not really showing up. So what I'm going to do is come up here and just give them style. And this should be done in a separate style sheet, but this is just a demo. So I'm going to say all spans. I'm giving them a width of, let's do, 150 pixels and a height of 200 pixels, and 150, sorry. I want them to be squares. And display of inline block. And I could do that using in Bootstrap, using the d-inline-block, but it's just a lot of extra classes for this demo, so I'm not going to do it. All right, so they all look like this, and it's kind of bothering me that they are the same. I'm going to make them red. There we go. I just changed them over to be a different color. What I want to do is, at an extra small size, have there be very little margin between them, and on a larger size, have them spread out a bit more, or maybe even have more padding or something. And this is pretty standard. You might want more space on a larger layout and less space on a tiny layout. It makes sense. So to do that, first, I think I'm going to change this to be 100 pixels instead of 150. It might look a little bit better. Okay, so to do this, I did change them to be 100 pixels just for, I don't know, looks. And if we come down here, I can give all of them a default margin. So this is the same as what we saw with display. If you're trying to get the extra small size, we target them by just saying margin, let's say margin 2 is the normal margin. And I'm actually going to delete this one, or all of them, and just work with the one and then copy it. So margin 2, but then once we get to medium, let's say, so margin dash medium dash, and then our size, I'll increase it to 3. And then margin dash large is going to be 4, and margin dash extra large will go to 5. So it doesn't look like much here. If you were to inspect it though, we would see, come on, if I can show it. Right now, margin is 0.5 rems. We increase it, margin goes up to 1. And if we go to extra large, and that's the margin extra large 5 applying. So now if we go back and duplicate our element here a couple times, we have this sort of a grid, I guess. We haven't talked about the grid system or anything, but we have these elements that get closer together at one point. Then they spread out, and then spread out further, as you can see there. So we can do that using these margin classes, the spacing classes. And remember, the trick to all of these is the extra small size is the default. So margin 2, which actually I think is a bit too much space, I would probably change it to be margin 1, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a dumb demo anyway. And just see if that looks any better. Yeah, it's a little more appropriate for mobile. So that's the default, and then anytime you want to change it, you use whatever breakpoint, margin dash MD dash 3. And you could do this on the top and the bottom only, or on the left and the right only. I have this all the way around. You could do this with padding. So the point is, any of these, if you go to the docs, they actually tell you exactly the recipe to follow. The property name, the sides, the breakpoint, and the size. So margin top, so MT dash medium dash 5, for example. Okay, so those are the sizing or the spacing utilities on their own. Not that exciting, but soon you'll see we can combine them to really make our websites a lot better looking on different layouts. It's very quick and easy. You don't have to go into your CSS and type margin and padding and all that stuff yourself. This is a really easy way of doing it.